All right, so let's get right into it. We talk a whole lot about AI getting smarter, faster, better. But today, we're going to look at a blueprint for something else, something completely different. A design that doesn't just want to compute, it wants to live. And that's really the big question we're tackling here. Let's just park the idea of faster chips and bigger models for a second and ask ourselves this. What would it actually take to build an artificial system that runs on the same fundamental principles as a living, breathing organism?
Well, to even begin to answer a question like that, you've got to go back to the source code, right? The original blueprint, our own brain. And we're not just looking at the wiring, we're looking for its secret sauce, its master control system.
And that master control system, it all comes down to these things called neuromodulators. Now, what's so cool about these is that chemicals like dopamine and serotonin, they aren't the data packets. They're not carrying the what. They're the master tuners, the knobs that control the state of the entire system.
And this breaks it down perfectly. You've got two kinds of signals happening. On one side, you have these super fast spikes. That's the raw data, the what. But on the other, you have these slower, broader signals, the neuromodulators. They're not about the data, they're about the how. They set the context, they change the mood, they decide how all that data gets processed.
So what are these things actually controlling? Well, pretty much the whole show. Things like excitability, how easy it is for a neuron to even fire; plasticity, how quickly the brain can learn new things; attention, which signals get the spotlight; and this is a huge one, energy use, where to send the power. They are the brain's ultimate resource managers.
And that right there, that's the big aha moment we're borrowing from biology. Real intelligence, it turns out, isn't just about crunching ones and zeros faster. It's about this incredibly elegant, sophisticated regulation of both energy and information. That's the key.
Okay, so that's the theory from biology. Cool. But how in the world do you actually build that? How do you translate that beautiful, messy, biological concept into hardware? Well, you don't start by building a better chip. You start by building an artificial body. First up, you give it a kind of artificial breath. Picture a rhythm. When it inhales, it's in a high-energy mode. It's exploring, it's taking in new data, it's learning, but then it exhales. It shifts to a low-energy, quiet mode, consolidating what it just learned, writing it to memory, just reflecting.
And what does every living thing need? A heartbeat. This artificial heart doesn't pump blood, of course. It pumps out a central pulse, a timing signal that synchronizes the whole sprawling system, making sure all the different parts are working together in rhythm. It's the system's conductor. And last but definitely not least, you need an artificial metabolism. Think of these as artificial mitochondria spread throughout the system. And here's the genius part, they don't just provide power, they actively recapture and recycle waste heat and energy. Just like a living cell, the goal is for almost nothing to go to waste.
Okay, so we've got an artificial body. It breathes, it has a pulse, it manages its own power. But it's still just a box, right? To truly come alive, it needs to connect with the world around it. And this is where things get really wild.
Which brings us to a huge question, maybe the key question. A system this dynamic can't just be plugged into the wall like a server rack. Its power source needs to be as dynamic as its thinking. So, where does the juice come from?
And the answer is it's a total paradigm shift. This system doesn't just passively sense its environment, it actively feeds on it. Every sensor is designed for two jobs, gathering information and harvesting energy.
Just look at how this plays out. It's brilliant. For vision, it's not just seeing objects with light, it's using that light, those photons, for photovoltaic energy. For hearing, it's not just processing sound waves, it's harvesting their vibrations for piezoelectric energy. It's the same for touch, for heat. So think about what this means. The system's state of mind, its processing power, becomes directly tied to the richness of its environment. A bright, noisy room literally fuels more thinking.
So, when you start connecting all these dots, the breathing, the heartbeat, the metabolism, the feeding, you realize this isn't just a clever piece of engineering. This whole idea forces us to take a step back and ask a much, much bigger question. What even is a mind?
And you know what? There's a perfect definition for this already out there from Dr. Dan Siegel. He says the mind isn't a thing. It's an embodied and relational process that regulates the flow of energy and information. Does that sound familiar? It should. And that's it. That's the whole point. This architecture we've been walking through, it was never about building a better, faster calculator. It's a blueprint for a machine that, from the ground up, is designed to embody that very definition of what a mind is.
So what's the big deal? Why go to all this trouble? Well, the payoff, the second-order effects, they're absolutely huge. You get extreme efficiency, because it only uses the energy it needs when it needs it. You get radical adaptability with systemic moods that can shift from curious to focused. You get resilience, because a failure isn't a crash, it's just a signal to redirect energy. And you get true embodiment, hardware that actually has a metabolic relationship with its world.
And all of this leaves us with one final, kind of mind-bending thought to chew on. For decades, the holy grail of AI has been answering the question, can a machine think? But maybe, just maybe, we've been asking the wrong question the whole time. Maybe the real question we should be asking is, can a machine live?